It is July 2nd, 2020, and today's review is going to be Arthur C. Clarke's Childhood's End, and this is a 5 and 5 likes and 5 dislikes for this book. I'm going to start with the no spoilers version, which is really just the back of the book. Without warning, giant silver ships from deep space appear in the skies above every major city on Earth. They are manned by the overlords, mysterious creatures from an alien race, who soon take over control of the world. Within 50 years, these brilliant masters have all but eliminated ignorance, disease, poverty, and fear. Then suddenly this golden age ends, and the end of mankind begins. So, you now know the whole book. That is the whole book. A whole lot does not happen in this book. Some big things happen, but they're a little bit understated. So, 5 likes and 5 dislikes. Spoilers will be present. So, one thing that I kind of like is there's a lot of instances in this book of the don't worry about it from the author, where it's sort of there will be a curiosity that's presented, and it's sort of irrelevant to Arthur C. Clarke as he wrote the book, I guess, that he just kind of lets you know that you're not going to find out. I wrote a note here that I've got a page that is an example. This is not the best example of it, but let's see, page 160. Tomorrow should be more interesting. We're going to do the schools and the academy. That's when I'm going to ask some questions for a change. I'd like to know how the overlords bring up their kids, assuming, of course, that they have any. That was not a question that Charles Sen was ever to have answered, but on other points the inspector was remarkably talkative. So the idea is presented about, are we going to hear about the kids or whatever, and that based on what the story is, that's sort of an interesting question that you're going to want to know. Now, if it's not answered right away, it's kind of going to sit in the back of the head while you're reading the book, and kind of when am I going to get to that? Clarke doesn't fuss around with it. He's like, you're not going to learn that. We're not going to talk about it. Don't get distracted by that. That happens a lot of times in this book, and I actually kind of like that. I like not having to... I like suspense, but like as long as it's going to be answered, or curiosities as long as they're going to be answered. But if they're not going to be answered, I don't really want to know about it. Or I want to be told that I'm not going to find out about it. This is, I wrote some notes here, this is not unlike the tone of the book. Everyone reacts the way Clarke would react. Not a big deal. We lost our liberty, etc. Okay, so that note to me was that the tone of the book is that there are a lot of big things happening, and it's sort of like, okay, we mentioned the thing that happened, now look over here. I think maybe it feels like if this had happened, this was how Arthur C. Clarke was going to react to the thing that had happened. And, in the beginning of the book, when the overlords arrive and the spaceship comes up above the major cities, one of the first things that we find out is that, the overlords sort of take over, and there's this element of peace. So it says on the back of the book here, eliminated ignorance, disease, poverty, and fear. And it was just sort of like, okay, and we lost our liberty. And we didn't mind that we had these overlords because all these great things happened. And it wasn't really believable, because if you have a sense of what you think mankind is, or how humans would really respond to that, I don't think most of us are going to think that people are just going to be okay with the loss of liberty because, okay, all these great things are happening. So that's my first like. My second like is that the book evokes emotions. I think, when we think about art, and which obviously literature is one of our great art forms, to me it's that ability to evoke emotion. Usually when I read books, I want like strong reactions of emotion, like something that's going to make me cry, something that's going to make me laugh, something that's going to give me a lot of suspense. The emotion evoked in this is sort of like just more of a melancholy and a really sort of existential feel of a real feel of kind of thinking about, are we significant? Are we insignificant? Why are we here? And so the emotions that are surrounding that, and then just the deep thought of those kind of larger questions. The book does do that. And because it is kind of, this is sort of a knock against the book is sort of a boring book. The action does happen kind of quickly in terms of things are always going on, but none of it gets real deep. So your mind can kind of wander and think about those big questions. And, kind of wondering what's the end of the book going to look like. Maybe there's that big payoff at the end. There's not really a big payoff. It's kind of interesting at the end, and it does pick up, but it's not a huge payoff. But you can kind of let your mind wander and have that melancholy feel and kind of think about those existential questions. And it's not going to distract you too much from the book. You're not going to have to go back and say, oh, let me read the last 3 pages because my mind wandered. You really probably didn't miss a whole lot. The real fault of the book is that not much happens for the first 3/4 of the book. The first arrival happens, and it just kind of happens, and it's just not again, it's just really understated. The first dislike I'm going to mention is that the characters in this book are really flat. They're very one-dimensional. We are not concerned for them, and frankly, they don't seem to be very concerned either. As I mentioned, all these grand things are going on, and there's kind of a little bit of a resistance, but there doesn't seem to be a general sense that anybody's really, putting up much of a counter to the overlords coming in and taking over. But the characters are really one-dimensional. They can be very interchangeable with anybody else. None of them are real exciting. There is the woman during the Ouija, the weird Ouija game that they play at the party, and she sort of is the conduit, which could be grounds for something really interesting to get into her backstory and why that is, and it just never really comes to fruition. Even when the stakes are high for Earth and humanity, we just don't feel like anything real great. Reading my notes here, there's no real great loss. We're not really that concerned with what's going to happen. I mean, that's how I felt when I read the story, because we've already sort of checked out to the idea that, okay, well, we're not really worried about the overlords taking over unless something really crazy is going to happen, and they've been tricking us this whole time. It just doesn't feel like that. So really, this is pretty common through a lot of the books I've read from Clark. Childhood End, I would not say is one of my favorites of his, but it is common throughout his writing that characters are a little bit of a letdown, a little bit disappointing. And it's hard to really care about them because there's not a whole lot of dimension to them. The next dislike, piggybacking off of that, the story feels simple. It is very simple. While big things do happen that are interesting, these things are not compelling for more than a page or two. The mild curiosity about what is going on doesn't really become more profound than that. I'm curious to see what's going to happen, how people are going to react to this particular thing, and then we're kind of already on to the other thing. The book is easy to put down. It only notches up its unput down ability once you get towards the last maybe 20 or 30 pages. It would be better as a short story. The payoff at the end of the book is not really worth the wait, and it doesn't help that there is not a real protagonist. There's not one person in this book you're really rooting for. There's the fellow that it's been 3 weeks since I read the book, so I can't remember everybody's name. The fellow who sort of was the stowaway and snuck onto one of the ships. You're kind of interested in what's going to happen with him, and even with him, it's that was sort of interesting. You got to see what their home planet looked like, and that had some appeal to it. That might have been, for me, the most exciting part, other than the very end and the final reveal. But nothing was really worth the wait in this book. There was no big payoff. You didn't get to the end and say, hey, thank God I slogged through all that, and now I got to this end. Now, on the other side of that is, it's a very short book, so it's not like you were really slogging through a whole lot. But that's kind of where I ended up with it. Really could have cut a lot of this out. It could have really been a short story. There were some interesting ideas that were presented that if they had been taken somewhere, it could have been more fun. But the fact that those things weren't expanded upon makes you wonder, why was that even involved in the story? It was maybe there were a lot of things that were kind of a waste of pages. My next the expected antagonists, the overlords, turn out to be hard to hate and are rather sympathetic. It's weird because it's kind of like you find out they're sort of a little bit envious of the human race, which is, seemingly a lesser race than they are, because they are able to have kids who are going to evolve and then cause them to be extinct. And they don't have the ability to do that. So that's a little bit weird, but it's also, we're expecting, I think, during the beginning of this book that something's going to happen where there's going to be a big reveal where, like, these overlords who seemingly, like, really care about, the earth being run well and there being peace and prosperity. Well, maybe not prosperity, but at least peace. That they're going to at some point turn on us, or their master plan is going to be revealed, and there's something really nefarious about them, and there's just not. So it's that's a nice little surprise. It's good to see. We have first arrival stories where it's very clear those arriving are the bad guys, or it's an arrival story where, like, it's all peaceful and harmony. This was interesting because the real kind of surprise was we thought they were going to be nefarious, perhaps. And it wasn't that they turned out to be great, but they just turned out to not be nefarious. And so that's a nice little surprise. My fourth the idea at the end, the big reveal that at the end, the children, kind of the last generation, is a new stage in human evolution, and there's kind of like this neural network, several minds working as one, a la the buggers in Ender's Game, Orson Cards Ender's Game. There's a race in the Stargate TV series where there's an evolution that goes beyond where human form is. So a lot of these things, and you can see that there are probably a lot of roots in a lot of current science fiction shows and books that maybe, had their origination in a lot of Clarke's ideas. But this idea of several minds as one network is really interesting. It's a really great trope. And I've liked seeing this in other spots in science fiction, especially in Stargate and loosely Asimov, and obviously Orson Scott Card as you get deeper into the Ender's Game, Speaker for the Dead, Xenocide series. My fifth and final it's just the kind of the know your history element. It's relevant. Clarke is one of the godfathers, grandmasters, legends of golden age science fiction. Again, if you read this book in the 1950s, it's a much different experience than if you read it now with everything that's come out. Everything that's come out since then has expanded on a lot of the same ideas, and in my opinion, much better. And that's not Clarke's fault. It's just, things progress and new ideas come from old ideas. But if you're somebody who loves science fiction as much as I do, and you're like, let me go back and read some of the old stuff just to be familiar with why is this person considered so great? Where did these ideas come from? It's valuable to me to read it again for that reason. When I read it as a kid, it was a much different experience than what it was reading it now. Reading it now doesn't stand up to other science fiction, but with a respect for where it came from, a much different story. All right, so some dislikes. I'm going to lean on my notes a little bit here. Nitpicking here, but the isolated artistic community of Athens is set up. And since the premise seems interesting, I kind of talked about this a little earlier. I'm going to go here to page 140, and I wrote some notes, because this has reminded me of something from foundation. Um, it's really a piece of applied social engineering based on some exceedingly complex mathematics, which I wouldn't pretend to understand. All I know is that the mathematical sociologists have computed how large the colony should be, how many types of people it should contain, and above all, what constitution it should have for long-term stability. I don't want this video to go on forever, so I'm just going to kind of just acknowledge that that gave me a really strong kind of like boom flashback to foundation and foundation series and laws of large numbers and things like that. This was interesting, and this is something that, you know, it also smacked of, and I want to bring up a controversial book, and I don't know if this book is that controversial. I'm not political with the book at all, but like Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged. I know some people look at it from a political perspective. I just liked it as a novel. It was an interesting novel. But towards the end of that book, for those who have read that, you know that a similar kind of thing happens where like a lot of sort of really important people go and they build their own community. This is obviously not coming about the same way, but it kind of gave me that feel of like, all right, what's this community going to look like? This could be kind of interesting. What's going on here? What are these people all about? In Atlas Shrugged, this was a much more realized idea and made the story really interesting, and it went a lot of different places. In this book, it didn't go anywhere. There was really no reason for it. All the events that happened there could have just happened in the world as the world had already been. And again, it just seemed like wasted pages. The whole section could be taken out as it doesn't serve to advance the story in any way. And again, making me seem like this book could really just be a short story when you trim out a lot of the stuff that just doesn't go anywhere. Clark always gets to his point very quickly, which does make the book really readable, even for the boring chunks, even the boring areas, like he gets from point to point to the next thing. So you're not kind of slogging through it. And again, it is a short book, but it really sacrifices the overall texture and adventure of the story. Dislike number 4, failure to capture the awe-inspiring, the captivating events. This is almost a repeat of what I was saying earlier, but just going back to the beginning of the story, and I wrote here in my notes, the big event of the first arrival. It was really lackluster. For all its flaws, the movie Independence Day, this made me think of obvious, you know, the large ships appearing over the cities. For all its flaws, Independence Day did a phenomenal job of like the awe-inspiring, the hook of you know, how everybody looked at the ships coming up. Obviously, that's a visual thing, but you know, in our imaginations, we have the ability to create whatever. The book does not give us that real payoff of really trying to imagine it and really like jumping into that and having that really grandiose moment. Childhood N illustrated this event again with little grandiosity, and then you know we've you know, another big event is you know, the reveal at the end of the children and like kind of that hive mind. And you know, I've seen that done a lot since then. You know, I'm thinking Stargate, the series especially. There's been some stuff in Asimov's work, and I believe also in Orson Scott Card's work, going back to the same authors here. But especially in Stargate, like, you know, this has been done. Again, they all did it after Clark, so they had the opportunity to improve upon it. But it was done so much better and in so much more of an interesting way. Clark obviously did this first, but you know, again, in the idea of Stargate, even other books and shows, it was so much more further realized. So I'm just kind of repeating myself there. I don't want to miss out on any of my notes. My final dislike number 5, it really doesn't compare to other Golden Age sci-fi. Asimov's Foundation series, you know, all the universe that's imagined and created is just so far beyond the narrow scope of this book, Bradbury's Martian Chronicles. This is not to say that, you know, Arthur Clarke is not a giant. His works were not great. I think it just goes back to, you know, if you read this in the 1950s, it would have been so captivating. I wouldn't have been able to put it down. I would have been want more of this and more of this, because there was, Harry was the first to do it, but now it doesn't stand up to it. This was one of the first sci-fi books I read at the time. I didn't have much to compare it to at the time, I think, and this was like in the early 80s. One of the few things I had, I don't even know where I got this book, but I just recently found it again, and this is my actual original copy. This book I ordered on Threadbooks for a really good deal. This is Marion Zimmer Bradley's Star of Danger, which I'm not doing a review. Maybe I'll do a review for that sometime. But again, it's a book I read around the same time. It was just as enjoyable, but just as underwhelming. So I'm not sure what the point of that is, other than to say that this is not one of my favorite Arthur C. Clarke books. Marion Zimmer Bradley, I think, is a really good author, but is not considered one of the greats. But to have the same reaction to that I did to both of those books, I think that does say a lot. It does not stand up to science fiction today. If I didn't know who Arthur C. Clarke was, or if this book wasn't written when it was written and it just come out, obviously it would have been a really waste of time to read. Going back to what I said earlier about knowing your history, I think it has value for that reason. I think those are the main points I want to make. So, would I recommend this book or not? I would recommend it because, there are reasons why I wouldn't, there are reasons why I would. The fact that it's under 300 pages, it's 300 pages, no, I forgot the page count. Yeah, it's easily under 300 pages. So you can read it in 4 hours, 5 hours, read it in a week, a little bit each day. And then you have the, if you like to be like, hey, I've read all of Bradbury, all of Arthur C. Clarke, I don't discount that. I think that's a good thing to do. I'm going to be reviewing a lot of books. I'm just starting to record videos. They'll probably come together a little nicer than this one, and the one I just did on Hyperion. I'll probably be in a different environment as well. I won't always be sitting here in my office. These are the books right here that I'm going to be going back to. Everything I have here is something that I've read before that I really liked, but it's been too long since I've read it that I don't think I could do an accurate review, or especially not a 5 and 5. I don't know if I announced it at the beginning of this video, but I am going to call the video series or the channel Fit to be Read. As you can see, we've got, where's the camera? Yeah, we've got Fit here. I am a personal trainer. I own a personal training gym. It's called Fit. It's one of the oldest personal training gyms, if not the oldest, in Washington, D.C. And I will generally be shooting these videos here in my office or at the gym. Regardless of that, I do like the name Fit to be Read. So that will be all for today. Thank you. Please like and subscribe.